I wouldn't doubt that those who doubt the official story are quite a minority. I mean, does that really surprise anybody? I mean, isn't it easier to believe than to think, you know? Now, we're talking here of evidence for a fantastic event. You all are familiar with that phrase, extraordinary events require extraordinary evidence. Well, I'm not going to push the point that far, but I would say this, that we need pretty good evidence, not flaky evidence, not marginal evidence, not evidence that we can interpret with a favourable Christian gloss. Now let me make a comparison, if I may, graphically between the evidence of the resurrection, which appears in the New Testament. There it is, including the slight references in Revelation, the one who comes with a sword from his mouth. But, you know, the other standard references of the resurrection, they fit quite comfortably on an A4 sheet, rather fewer than 600 words. To give you a comparison of that, something else that has something in the order of 600 words, a McDonald's Happy Meal menu. Now, would anybody here be convinced, let's say, of the nutritional value of a McDonald's Happy Meal on the basis of 600 words? Can we be convinced, therefore, that a few pages of the Gospel speak of some extraordinary event?
Said I can interrupt you, Ken.
Yep, sure be. Wow.
This is great. I mean, he's a neat guy. He really is. And we're not going to solve this by going back and forth. But you know what? If you want to start going down the line, I mean, we could say, hey, this guy's converted by studying the evidence, this guy's converted by, and the list is long. As far as extraordinary events require extraordinary evidence, I keep saying over and over again, I'm only using text and data. I think there's a lot of other data here we could put on the table. I'd be glad to do that. For example, I mean, this would just be, it'd be a wild herring. But if somebody's saying something like, well, how am I supposed to believe in resurrection today? I mean, this is an extraordinary event. I think he started something like this. It started with this kind of idea. You know, we're in the fairy tale world. I'll just put something out here, and we can pursue it during the Q&A if you want to. Recent studies of near-death experiences, highly evidenced ones. I've been studying this phenomenon for 30 years. This is the only point I'm going to make by bringing this up. If we have evidence for an afterlife, if we do, and I think we do, then all of a sudden the resurrection doesn't look like the most extraordinary thing in the world that takes extraordinary evidence. It looks like a specific case of a phenomena for which we have other data. So I'll just throw that out there.
I don't think so. I don't think so. But surely the nature of a debate is to go backwards and forwards. The interesting thing, Gary, in your exposition is how interestingly you backtrack from your overall view to minimalistic claims then, okay? If we can prove that quite a few of the Pauline epistles are fraudulent, then you're quite happy to dish them. Make do with the ones you've got left. Well, is this a scientific method? I mean, what sort of method it is? This is the sort of thing that I began by saying. Christian apologetics is simply the determination to defend ancient truths at all costs. And so you will bring forward...
But atheism's not that.
You will bring forward any and every
Humanism's nothing
use
like
you
that,
can to defend an indefensible position. Gary, surely the point here is if we are rational, we will be led by the evidence.
That's
we
right.
will not put the horse behind the cart and say, this is the truth that we want to establish. We know the truth. It comes to us by faith. Therefore, what facts can we purport to prove this truth? Now, that is not a scientific method. That is simply apologetics.
I don't argue that way. In fact, what you may not know about me is I spent 10 years as a skeptic. And you ready? I used to debate Christians. And I used to tell them they were crazy. And I either became a Buddhist or I was very close to be. I don't know why, but I was somewhere else down the religious trail. Frankly, this is just my personal testimony. It doesn't mean a lot, but I mean, it was the resurrection that jerked me back from this kind of stuff. Not, okay, here comes my faith, please let me find some data. It was the other way around.
Well, that is what you say, but I am losing track of the number of Christian apologists who claim to have been hard-headed atheists. It's now par for the course. Well, I have to say, I have never been a Christian. I have always been a hard-headed atheist, and I have never seen anything that would come close to making me think, hey, the resurrection looks like a real
You know
event.
what? You need to come over to my house in the States. We'll talk over soccer, and we'll be working on that.
Do you
35.
entertain the possibility then it may not be true?
Absolutely.
You do?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, there is
sir.
hope then. There is hope.
Yes, sir. I absolutely maintain it, and I will absolutely give it up. Hear me? I will absolutely give it up if the data are not there.
Well, tell me which of your defenses of the resurrection then really convinces you. Never mind all this special pleading
Which
of this,
of these-
that. Which of all of them really convince you? Let's take one practice. Let me give you, for example. In many of your books, in fact, all of them probably, you make this claim that the disciples suffered until death for their beliefs.
No, I don't say they suffered unto death. I said they were willing to suffer. It's you know why the reason why I do that, Ken?
Well, it's safer. It's safer because the evidence doesn't support it. That's
exactly.
Right.
Not the safer one, the evidence one. I don't say that. And just today at Oxford University, I said to the students, don't say that all the disciples died for their faith. We don't have early data for that. And I went through it. The reason I don't say it is not because it's safer. I say it because we don't have data.
Yes, okay. Do you want to quote the Epistle of Clement?
I'd love to. What do you want to know about it?
Well, okay, because because that is one of your standard defenses that even Peter and Paul died.
That's
I not
correct.
Yeah.
What's wrong with Clement?
Yeah. Well, shall we actually quote the words? Does he actually say
Which version?
they were martyred?
He both said that,
No, he
yes.
does not.
Wait a minute.
He does not.
Well, it depends on which, here we go. It depends on which there's two translations of Clement. One is very, very clear. They suffered martyrdom. The weaker of the two, it says, the weaker of the two, Paul and Peter went to their reward believing. They died. He says they died. That's the weaker of the two.
Okay. I mean, I think that's closer to the words I
close.
have.
Okay.
Which says nothing. It says nothing. They did their work for Christ, as it would be, and then they died. Maybe they were with their Lord in heaven.
For their faith.
No
right?
evidence that they were ever martyrs.
No. Okay, here's where we can argue about it all night. But the scholar's interpretation of 1 Corinthians 5, Clement 5, not the 1 Corinthians of Paul, but Clement 5, is that Clement is talking about martyrdom.
Can we declare what the original meaning of the word martyr was?
What do you mean, can we declare the...
The word martyr actually means witness.
Fine.
It doesn't mean anyone who suffered and died.
Do you know who it started with?
Well, I'm sure you will tell us.
Justin Martyr, 2nd century.
Okay, much later than your apostles.
Sure, but my point is just to establish the word martyr. Well, it's 50 years later. It's not hugely later. He goes to his death for his testimony as a Christian philosopher, and he dies. He dies for that. By the way, the other one is James, and it's reported by Josephus. The stoning of James, the fourth one.
Well, we can come back to that one, but I'd like to stick with this point about what Christians understand by the idea of persecution and what Christians understand by the idea of martyrdom. Because it's quite clear that early Christians certainly thought any form of treatment that didn't accord with their wishes was some form of persecution. That if their family were critical of their Christian faith, they were being persecuted. And their martyrdom was actually to witness to the faith that they had. It had nothing to do with suffering unto death or a willingness to suffer unto death.
Well, okay, Paul gives a list of things he suffered. Remember, shipwrecked 3 times, beaten 40 minus 1. Actually, beaten 40 minus 1 3 times. He's stoned and left for dead outside. Paul lists these things he went through, and then tradition tells us he was finally beheaded during the reign of Nero in the early 60s.
No evidence.
Okay, but all I'm saying is, I think that's a fair definition of persecution. Being stoned and left for dead, whipped 3 times, 40 minus 1 lashes. I think those are fair definitions. I think he's justified in saying it was persecuted.
How would that be so if we're dealing with a religious tract that has no basis in fact? How do we know that
What's the religious tract?
How do we know that what Paul wrote was actually truthful? Who else validates the claims of Paul? Unlike Jesus Christ, which you can claim is referred to here and there, nobody else refers to Paul. He doesn't appear in any secular history at all.
He does appear in one secular source, and he does appear in 5 Christian sources that can be considered early. Now, if Christians are prejudiced because they mention Paul, then atheists are prejudiced for confirming atheism. I mean, it's not like atheists are automatically valueless and Christians have all kinds of values. Both sides have access to grind. Both sides have access to grind.
I don't think anyone makes themselves rich by being an atheist. But plenty of people make themselves rich by being Christians.
But what does that have to do with who has
they
an axe to grind?
They have a vested interest in maintaining untruths in a way that an unbeliever does not.
But you don't have an axe to grind.
What is the more extraordinary claim, then? That God exists and raises people from the dead, or, in the absence of any evidence to that effect, that it is not true?
Well, Ken, it's certainly not in the absence of evidence, but you say, which is more extraordinary? See, your comment betrays the same kind of angle, the prejudice that we all have. It betrays the same thing. When you say, what in the world could make you believe in God or resurrection or afterlife or something like that, that's a complicated thesis that we're unwarranted in conceding only from a naturalistic viewpoint. If God exists, and if there's an afterlife and if there's a resurrection, it's all of a sudden it's just not uncomplicated, it's the answer for the universe. What I mean is for you to say, that's an extraordinary thesis and incredible to believe, because if you're an atheist, of course it is.
I don't believe the rejection of the extraordinary and the fantastic and the fabulous in the absence of clear proof is an axe to grind. That should be the position that we all adopt. We should not believe the extraordinary unless it can be disproved. I mean, that would be lunacy. Why don't we believe in Jack and the Beanstalk or
Snow White
or any such story?
What church runs Oxford and Cambridge
no, it
and
doesn't.
Edinburgh
But
and Durham?
The origins of those universities are very much.
But I mean, if the Pope or Rowan Williams is going to say something like, "This is what we believe in this country. I think you ought to have chairs at Durham and Edinburgh," and that's not going to put. Oxford doesn't listen to the church.
Yeah, but you're putting history backwards. You're putting history backwards. Where were those centres of authority before the modern era? They were in the hands of the church.
That's fine, but this is 2008.
What you are not acknowledging is that the church is an institution of society that dominated Europe for 1,500 years. We have only escaped its clutches in the last 200. Of course there is a religious establishment, and it has its centres of power and authority. It has all the gloss of being part of the establishment. Of course it regards any rational critique as equally as fanatical as itself.
Folks, listen. Christians fail. Christians can be jerks. Christians can try to make money out of their preaching, and they shouldn't do it. I'm just saying there is a better form of Christianity that we all fail as Christians, if you take that name. We all fail to live up to it, but we still hold Jesus Christ up there. And I still have, I hope, a high view of each one of you. Ken and I hope, are going to be friends after this is over. I know from my viewpoint, hey, he's fun. And I really do wish he lived next door to me. That's what discussion is about. That's what's fun about this. And the fact that it's still alive and well tonight is because there's something to say besides, if all I said was, I've got faith. Any questions? If that's all I said tonight, you'd all have rushed out the door and say, what a lousy evening. It's because there's some data we can debate. I think that's exciting. I think that's an exciting basis to talk about, and I'll just say in closing, something exciting to, there are implications for our life. There are implications in ethics. There are implications for end of life, for suffering, as I said a moment ago. I think it's important, but it's not outdated.
Okay, I think in the resurrection, which is the subject of this debate, we are dealing with a fairy tale. It probably doesn't matter that many people believe strange and silly notions, but unfortunately, when it comes to religious ideas, we can't be quite as comfortable with that. There is a part of this planet called the Holy Land. It is perhaps the most violent and dangerous place on the planet. I think the dangers of irrational belief always lurk. And after all, its claim is that believing in a few questionable ideas gives you hope. Then let's also remember Christianity at its heart has decided that we are all sinners that are unworthy of God's divine purpose. You know, it has a very pessimistic view. It applauds our servile behavior in front of this supposed God. It asks us to denigrate ourselves in order to be humble enough to be worthy of him. So I think religion has, and Christianity in particular, has some worrying aspects. And if that danger that lurks in a particular form of evangelical Christianity ever got its way, we would very rapidly move back to a novel version of the Dark Age. You know, welfare and the social programs would be handled by the church. Biblical law would replace civil law. I mean, there are tremendous dangers there. So although it would be nice if whether there was erection could be maintained as simply an academic discussion that Gary and I could have fireside chats about, there is a very real danger there, and that's why we have to take a more positive stance in resisting these silly notions. Thank you.